Hey everybody, I'm Jack with Future Pastimes. I'm a designer on Dune-themed games and expansions, and we're reading Dune, and we're in a chapter now that takes place pretty soon after the last chapter, and it does start with an interesting quote that I think is very apropos of the theme of this chapter, and the quote is, "God created Arrakis to train the faithful." And that is from The Wisdom of Moadi by Princess Irulan. And this chapter starts with Lady Jessica. She realizes that it's just about sunset. The Fremen will be heading out, but they have some business to attend to first, and that is the funeral of Jamis. And so they're gathering together, and it's mostly the men closely sitting around a bundle of materials that Paul is not sure what it is at first until Stilgar goes out to the bundle. And he takes something from the bundle, and he says, "I was a friend of Jamis." And he explains something meaningful that Jamis did in their lifetime. He saved Stilgar, and then he's going to claim one of Jamis's items. And he sets aside a few items for Jamis's wife and children. And then the idea is that other members of the troop will likewise go forward, explaining how they were a friend of Jamis and what they're going to take. And the whole group is looking at Paul, and Paul realizes that he is going to have to do this as well. And he's struggling with, how do I explain that I was a friend of Jamis because I just killed him? And before the ceremony even begun, Jessica was approached by Paul and Chani was explaining how much water they have rendered from Jamis and how much of that water belongs to Paul. The winner of a fight has used up some of their own water in the fight through sweating and loss of moisture, and it's a Fremen custom that they get some of the reclaimed water for themselves. And Paul is like, I do not want to drink Jamis. But Jessica realizes that it will be an insult to the Fremen if Paul resists any of this. And so she says, you will take the water. And Paul realizes that, he's got to do it. Not because she's commanded him to do it, but because just by her tone, he realizes he needs to reassess things. And so he trusts that she's going to be making that decision. But in the back of his mind, while all of this is going on, he keeps revisiting this prescient vision of jihad, where millions, maybe billions of people will be killed because of his becoming this Messiah figure for the Fremen. And so he is kind of struggling with how can he stop it? What can he do? And because he's seeing all these different paths of possible futures, but all of them seem to end in jihad. And he's realizing more and more that there's not a whole lot he can do to change that. And he realizes even if he were to die right now, because of his mother's role with the Fremen and his unborn sister, the jihad will continue. And at one point he realizes, if everybody in this cave right now died, that might do it, but it's just not a practical thing. So the ceremony continues, and Paul, he goes ahead and he sees there's a balisette is one of the things that Jamis owned, and it reminds him of Gurney, who the poet warrior played the balisette as well. So he claims the balisette, and he realizes he can connect to something, and he says he's a friend of Jamis, and Jamis taught him that when you kill, you pay for it. And then he says that he wished that he had known Jamis better, and then he starts to weep, and the Fremen are like, he gives water to the dead, and this is for a society and a culture that reveres water so much. They're just trained from the get-go, from very young, that you just don't shed tears. That's just a waste of water. Why would you do that? And a lot of them actually reach out and try to touch the tears on Paul's face just to kind of convince themselves that this is true, and that it's a very sacred sort of thing that has happened. And so the uneasiness that they had about Paul not immediately participating in the ritual, it's first assuaged by the fact that he does do it. They're like, yeah, but then there's a new level of reverence for Paul. And in that, Jessica, she's watching this, she's realizing that there's a really strong religious and cultural connection with the Fremen. A lot of it is centered around water, and water is just so sacred to them. But just the fact that they are so so ritualistic and so committed to everything that they do, she knows that they will be a very powerful asset for Paul as they continue to integrate themselves into the Fremen culture. And this is a direct connection to Paul's worry. And this is the seeds of that happening. It's Jessica knowing that she's going to continue to leverage these legends from the Bene Gesserit Missionaria Protectiva to get them to be all in on Paul as this Messiah figure. And that is really what's getting this ball rolling towards jihad. And so this notion, the quote at the beginning, that God created Arrakis to train the faithful is this Fremen almost fanaticism that exists. And after the ceremony, Stilgar takes them down deeper into the cave where he shows them a cistern. It's not called that directly yet in the book, but it is millions of decaliters of water that they have been accumulating for some time. And they have wind traps that are dripping water down, and they dump the extra water from Jamis into the cistern. And Stilgar says, there are men who have been here basically dying of thirst who would not touch this water. And do you believe that? And he says this to Jessica, and she says, I do believe it. And again, it's feeding into that idea that these Fremen, they are 100% into their culture and their fanaticism. And Jessica realizes that can be leveraged to help put Paul back into power as Duke of Caladan, head of House Atreides. But Paul knows that it goes much further than that. It goes into this horrific galaxy-wide jihad that will end up with many, many dead in his name. People killing for Paul Muad'Dib. And so, yeah, he's a little bit uneasy. Another thing that goes on this chapter is that Jessica keeps noticing how Paul and Chani are always together, and she's directing him. And she's like, tell me about the waters of your homeworld, Usul. And when Paul has the balisette, she's like, play me a song. And Paul plays her a song that Gurney loved, because he's worried that Gurney is probably dead. But it's kind of a love song. And Jessica is like, I have got to set him aside and explain to him about the Fremen women, and they are not suitable to be the wife of a duke. Concubine, sure. And she prizes herself a little bit with that, because, she was a concubine and maybe resented it a little bit. She understood the logic of it, but then she's always like, I was more than a concubine. So she's got some mixed feelings there too, but she's like, I don't want a romance kindling here between Paul and Chani, because it's just not in his best interest as a duke, so she thinks. And the chapter ends with Paul perceiving certain things about his mother, and he realizes that, she's going to be the cause of some heartache here. And in fact, it ends with him thinking, my mother is my enemy. She does not know it, but she is. She's bringing the jihad. She bore me. She trained me. She is my enemy. And so that's him kind of putting some of the pieces together, understanding why all of his possible futures of the coming jihad all boil down to basically what's going on right now, and some of the wheels that are turning in his mother's head, and there's not going to be much that he can do about it, because he's starting to understand the fanatical nature of the Fremen themselves. In terms of adaptations, The funeral for Jamis. I don't remember that was filmed for the Lynch movie. It may have been briefly, but not to this degree, not to this I was a friend of Jamis thing. It is in the mini series. And the women were more directly involved. So there was a little bit of this kind of old school patriarchy element where Johnny is like, Lady Jessica, you and I have to sit over here. And so it was a little bit of a separation there, which does remind me a little bit of certain elements of like Middle Eastern cultures, which is a lot of this is drawn from, although not necessarily direct connection. But they kind of eschewed that for the miniseries. At the time of this recording, we don't know if there's going to be a funeral for Jamis. I suspect there will be in some degree. I think it's an important element. I think that they were laying some of those seeds, this idea of Paul wishing that he had been able to go down a path where Jamis did become his mentor, as he was having these visions of, rather than him killing Jamis. But it remains to be seen if they'll do that. The other part is the cistern, and in the Lynch movie, they do. Stilgar takes him down into the cave and shows it to him, and he starts to wonder at it. Although there isn't quite the connection to the jihad, so the whole jihad thing and Paul's worries about the jihad, not part of the Lynch adaptation, at least not so far as anything that they showed us. And in fact, that movie ends with Paul leaning into this whole Messiah thing, and then he makes it rain. So, or it rains on its own. Who knows? But that was certainly not a big concern. It is kind of barely touched on in the miniseries as well. It does seem to be much more front and center in the Villeneuve adaptation, as we've seen in the first movie, as he's had a couple of these visions about the jihad, and he is definitely worried about it. And I suspect that Villeneuve will continue to make that an issue, because Frank Herbert certainly did. So I think, it's interesting when you read a lot of Frank Herbert's interviews or his thoughts on Dune, and part of the reason why he felt like he had to write Dune Messiah was that he was writing a book about a Messiah figure, and how the thesis here is that it's never good. It's never good to have a messianic sort of leader of a people or a society or whatnot. It's almost like the whole Batman thing. If you live long enough, you see yourself become the villain. And a lot of people were taking away the wrong message from Dune back in the 60s and 70s. There was like, yeah, Paul is this big heroic figure. He's the white savior or whatever. He's leading them to victory. And isn't it great? They won. And he's like, no, that's not where this is going. And maybe it's too early to talk about it, but too late. The cat's out of the bag. But this is the direction he was going in, is that this is not all sunshine and bunnies. There's definitely a classical good guy comes back and defeats the enemy's element to it that we are potentially driving toward. That's what we're going toward here. But there's a much bigger picture, and this is the heart of that story, is Paul worried about himself becoming the catalyst for horrors done in his name. So that is what the theme of this whole chapter is about, and this chapter is where it really begins to happen. This is the impetus for that happening, or for them realizing that this is how it starts. So if you've got other questions or comments, let me know in the comments for this video, and weigh in on what you think of this chapter, or how things are going so far, and any other comments about the adaptations or what is in store here. That's it for this chapter, everybody. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again soon.